I am finally able to make my review of the Nikon Z8. I know, compared to a lot of photographers and camera reviewers out there, this is going to seem obscenely late. But there's a few reasons for that. One, I have a 10,000 image rule, and I try never to review equipment, whether it be a body, especially a body, or a camera lens or something else, until I've hit at least 10,000 actuations. That doesn't have to be 10,000 fully edited, delivered files or anything like that, just 10,000 clicks with that piece of equipment, because that usually means I've shot in a variety of locations across a longer duration of time, and I just feel like that's the threshold of where I get a real good feel of the genuine usefulness and identified the shortcomings of whatever that piece of equipment is. With camera bodies, it's especially important because they're so expensive and they're so exciting and they're so multifaceted that it's so easy to get locked into that sort of new car smell and kind of overlook the shortcomings and force yourself to only make excuses and prioritize the strengths of your new camera body and kind of overlook and ignore, and maybe even with a touch of denial, ignore the pain points of a camera body. I have just reached about 10,917 images with this Nikon Z8 paired with a 50 1.2, which is Nikon's, sort of Pro Series 50mm lens, and the 24 1.8. Nikon, full disclosure, did send me this entire rig to experiment with and play with for free. I do have to send it back to them, so it's not like a gift. Normally I like to buy camera equipment myself, so I don't feel any pull or need to make it a glowing review just so that they'll send me one in the future. So hopefully they will send me other stuff in the future, but I am gonna point out why I'm not buying it, and I'm happy to send it back to them. Not that I'm happy to get rid of it, it's an amazing camera, but before we get into all those details, I wanna get to what I think should be the main feature and focus of every single camera body or camera review that's out there, and that's just the photos that I took. So, using a new piece of equipment and identifying how it's changing your approach can be really, really tricky. This is something that I've been struggling with as I've been building Insight the past couple months, where you can be shooting live, and yes, Insight does work perfectly with the Z8. Shoot live, I can look at any image on the back of my camera, send it off to Insight, and then get results within a minute about new pose ideas, AI rendered results, which is what I was using actually during this entire session here in Iceland to try and come up with new compositions and just ideas for things. But whether or not Insight was actually helping me, like how am I gonna know if I was going to take a photo to begin with or not, if Insight really did influence me to make that change or not? The same exact kind of measure with inspiration and operation, actually, of how you use a camera and how it informs your technique is super hard to measure, except for over time, where you can sort of see trends in your work. And this was really apparent to me when mirrorless cameras started shipping with the flip-out screens, right? These really nice, super convenient, shoot from the hip perspectives that Nikon and Sony and Canon have all seemed to totally different approaches to how they believe these screens should articulate. But that change, that fundamental shift between having to always look through the viewfinder versus being able to articulate and shoot from the hip, really, really, really changed the amount of dynamic angles and the speed at which I could get like really creative compositions without having to roll around on the ground to get these extreme angles. That's why I think it's really important to look through actual photographs, kind of ignore the on-paper specs of how something performs, at least to some degree, and just see if there's a notable shift in how your work, or in this case my work, is influenced. One thing right out of the bat I'll say is with the editing side of things, it's supposedly got the exact same sensor as the Nikon Z9, which I have a review about. It's an article, you can go read that if you'd like. That'll be linked alongside this video somewhere. But when I was editing the Z9 files, I really felt that the colors had this X factor that was sort of hard to identify. It's hard for me to even describe, other than to say that I just felt that I was getting closer to the magic kind of zing, the done state of editing my photos much sooner than I felt with the Z8 files. Now with the Nikon Z9, I was shooting in Hawaii a lot, so that could be one component of it. Like the light is going to be different on an island versus Iceland, which is, I realize, also an island, but a very different kind. So the light's gonna be different. It's a different time of year, it's a different type of everything. So maybe it's as simple as that, just the lighting had changed enough, but I'm not too sure about that. I think they may be interpreting the colors a little bit differently on this than on the Z9. But I didn't have both camera bodies at the same time to make a head-to-head comparison. But as we go through these, just kind of get a sense for yourself as to whether or not my editing style is any different or noticeably different than my usual Canon stuff or not. I'm using my exact same preset and my exact same AI profile that I use with Imagine. That I trained on like 30,000 images. But yeah, it's hard to say. The other component of this is that a lot of these images are just photographing my friend Chloe, which is a different process and approach to begin with, compared to how I would photograph a couple. But speaking of which, I photographed a couple here. So aside from the colors possibly being a slightly different interpretation than what the Z9 had, I will say the autofocus is just as good, just as snappy, like insanely. The only way I can really describe it is there's like a stickiness to it. You can really latch onto something, shake the camera around, and it will not let go. Here, I'll take a little video of my screen so that I can insert it here. So just autofocus, locking on my my lens there, shaking the camera around, it's not going anywhere. Let's see, I'm gonna lock focus on this little mannequin. It's kind of hard to tell with the background. Let's try, Oh, okay, let's try this. Yep, so like as fast as I move, it really doesn't let go. It's crazy how quickly you can move. I'm even go off screen and then come back. Okay, it does forget. So if it loses it completely, it's not gonna reattach. That'd be a cool feature to be able to pan away entirely and then you come back and it remembers. But yeah, it's just insanely sticky. Maybe that's not the most elegant word for it, but that's the best one I can come up with. The autofocus is just insane. The performance of F-mount lenses through the adapter, especially the second series adapter, absolutely excellent. This is something that the original Z bodies really missed the mark on, and it was a combination of, I think, the Z body, like the original mount iteration. At the end of the day, this mount through the newer adapter, F-mount lenses just fly, way better than they ever did in DSLRs. So that's all really great stuff. The biggest shortcoming, just to jump right into a bit of a negative thing, is the sensor sound. So there is no mechanical shutter in this at all. They went for 100% electric, which is fine. It's an interesting move, but now when you take a picture, all you get is this little sound effect. And that's not my favorite sound effect in the world. Supposedly with the Z9, you can customize, I think up to 5 different sounds now. I haven't updated the firmware on this. I think I'm on the most recent one. I don't think they've had any new one that changes the shutter sound, but it is a very sort of awkward sound that I still have not gotten used to, even after this much time with it. And one thing I'm gonna say right out of the gate is the reason I'm sending this back is because I got to play with a Nikon ZF, which is their more retro-styled camera body, and it has a mechanical / electric shutter, and it sounds wonderful. It sounds really, really, really great. And so Nikon clearly is able to do that. But that's the biggest shortcoming, and one of the main reasons I don't really want to keep this camera body is just as simple as the shutter sound. That might seem silly to some of you listening, like, can't you just get over it? Or I shoot in silent anyway. Not only do you not get the sound, but you don't get the kind of slight vibration of the shutter, curtain closing and opening, which is kind of a weird thing to not have at all. Yeah, there's just the operational tactile experience is not so great without that. Now, the actual grip in the hand, everybody's gonna have a different opinion on this, but I don't feel the need to add a an extended mount plate. With the Nikon ZF, I did order an extra mount plate because my pinky kept going off the side, and that was a big problem. This is like about the perfect size grip for my hands. The buttons and customizability of everything is excellent. There was nothing really at all that I felt was lacking. The control ring, very, very smooth. I like the placement of it right here near the mount instead of at the edge. A lot of Canon control rings, their lenses they put way out here on the end, and that's really annoying to me. I really much prefer it down here near the base. And I have my control ring set to ISO adjustment. But let's look through just a few more photos here, just so you can see the vast majority of these are going to be with that 51.2. This one, I believe, is the 28 or 24 1.8. Yep. Which is a very, very sharp lens. I'm probably going to do a dedicated post just for this lens and a dedicated post just for the 51.2. Both of those are probably going to be articles, not videos. You know, it's such a lightweight. Anything with the 1.8 aperture is generally going to be, you know, very lightweight, and this holds up to that. It's a little larger than I would have expected, but I think it's because you know, they really minimized the distortion on this. Canon has a 24 1.8, and it's smaller and lighter, but the distortion is laughable. In fact, I even have something right here on my desktop. So this is the 24 1.8 Canon without distortion correction, and here it is with distortion correction. So you can see just how crazy that curve is. That wasn't something I was detecting that needed adjusting at all with the Nikon 24. So I'm guessing they had to increase the size to just get like slightly better optics in here. I don't really know, but that's just my guess. So overall, I'd say actually the Nikon performance is superior to the Canon's 24 1.8. Let's start diving into some of the sensor flexibility here. So this one I left really overexposed just to show you that banding and noise from having to push and pull the files definitely pops up probably a bit sooner than I would have otherwise thought. This is the original exposure where I was trying to retain all the highlights, and you know, you can see her clearly in this, and even without boosting exposure much at all, there's already some noise starting to form. So that's a surprisingly limited amount of dynamic range. Now, I wasn't at low ISO. I probably should have shot this at ISO 100, but ISO 200 should be fairly similar, fairly close. You can see it really does break down beyond a usable point pretty early. So I would probably opt to edit this thing as a black and white, so it just kind of looks like grain at the end of it. But you know, that is a pretty bad effect. Of course, you can recover a lot more detail now using Lightroom's built-in denoise, but I don't want to have to lean on that unless I absolutely have to. I don't want to have to assume that I'm going to run everything through that by default. That needs to be sort of, okay, I'm in trouble here. Let's see what I can do to recover. Because other camera sensors in the DSLR world, way before this one, were able to recover 4.5, 5 stops of exposure without significant noise. In fact, this one looks pretty good. Like pushing it, you see in the darkest shadows some noise. This is again ISO 200, but it's not really a problem until maybe around 3 stops there, which is way more than I actually need for this. But this is also not nearly as dynamic a shot as the other one. Here's one. Let's see. So it's a fair amount of dynamic range. It definitely lost a lot of the highlights here in the legs. This is not a scientific review or measure of this. This is just my sense, but I'm going to say the dynamic range on this is a bit more limited than I'm comfortable with. Shooting, okay, this isn't too bad. Looks pretty good, but there's also no direct sunlight in here. Let's try this shot. There is direct sun. Yeah, I don't know. This just seems like sort of limited dynamic range. And again, the colors just aren't quite resonating the way I remember the Z9 images resonating. But maybe that's just my mood. Maybe that's just, again, where I was shooting. Here, actually, the colors seem pretty good, actually. I'm not going to complain too much about them. But I'm able to edit the files to a color stage that I really like. I'm not at all dissatisfied. It's just it takes me a little longer than I remember with the Z9. So those are all good things to keep in mind. The other big factor, battery life. I'm gonna say it's absolutely excellent. I'm confident I could shoot an entire wedding with just a handful of batteries, probably 3, maybe 4 at the very most. The flexibility of having an SD card and a CF Express slot is so great. That should have been what they did with the Z9 in my opinion, but I got really used to that with the R3. That's its configuration, and I absolutely love that. That is the best of both worlds. You get speed and you get the flexibility of the SD. As far as video goes, I have no idea. I don't care. I'm not a videographer, and I haven't used this for video at all. But at the end of the day, what Nikon really did was kind of take the best of the Nikon Z9 and wrap it into a smaller, more modular, flexible body in the Z8. And I'm very impressed, very happy with it. But I'm sending it back only because Nikon outdid themselves with the ZF. The shutter sound is fantastic. The articulating screen isn't this. This is fine, but it's not my preference anymore. This was great back with the D850 when it was the only option. But the Canons, the way that Canon articulates, kind of flipping out and then kind of from the side, some people are probably going to hate that, but I've gotten very used to it over the years, and it's my preferred way to shoot, and the ZF has that. If you want to read the actual full-length article of my review and look at some of the higher res sample images, including some raw files that I'll include, it's linked on my Patreon, which is included in the description of this video. And yeah, I'm going to end this here, but thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions or thoughts about the Z8 yourself, I would love to hear any feedback. As always, thank you so much for your attention. I'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.